Picture this. A bride left for dead at her own wedding, wakes up after 4 long years in a coma. But she remembered that her entire wedding party was massacred, and she was the main target. Her entire world shattered, but her mind is set on one thing: hunting down the killers who betrayed her. Now armed with a legendary sword and fueled by an unstoppable thirst for revenge, she slices through anyone in her way. She'll stop at nothing until every last one of them pays. A brutal massacre took place at a church in El Paso, Texas, during a wedding ceremony. Tragically, the bride was one of the victims. The sheriff and his deputies arrived at the scene and discussed the possibility of a drug gang attack. 9 people had been killed in the incident. While inspecting the scene, the sheriff noticed that the bride was pregnant. However, one of the deputies mentioned that no one knew her real identity because the name on her marriage certificate was fake. When the sheriff bent down for a closer look at her, the bride suddenly spat at him. She was not fully dead yet. The bride, as she will be referred to in this story, fell into a coma afterward and remained unconscious for 4 years. She was admitted to a hospital where she was largely neglected. The nurse responsible for her care took advantage of her condition, using her body for his own immoral purposes. Worse still, he brought in clients who paid to do the same. A few days after the bride was admitted, a woman named Elle Driver, a member of the deadly Viper assassination squad, came to the hospital on a mission to kill her. Elle was one of the attackers responsible for the massacre at the church. Disguising herself as a nurse, she prepared a lethal injection and entered the bride's room. Though Elle admitted she never liked the bride, she did respect her and planned to give her the gift of dying in her sleep. Just as Elle was about to inject the bride, her phone rang. It was Bill, the leader of the deadly Viper assassination squad. Bill's face was never shown, but he was clearly the one in charge. He ordered Elle to stop, saying the bride deserved more than just dying in her sleep, and that sneaking into her hospital room to kill her would tarnish the squad's reputation. Reluctantly, Elle agreed, but before leaving she warned the unconscious bride not to wake up, for her own good. 4 years later, the bride suddenly woke from her coma. In an instant, her memories of the massacre came flooding back, and she realized she had lost her baby. As she was processing this, she heard footsteps approaching her room. She quickly pretended to still be unconscious. It was the corrupt nurse again, this time bringing in a customer to abuse her. The nurse gave the man instructions on how to handle her comatose body and left, telling him to be done within 30 minutes. As the man prepared to carry out his despicable act, the bride woke up, grabbed his tongue with her teeth and bit it off, killing him as he bled to death. As she tried to escape, the bride realized her legs were paralyzed from being unused for 4 years. She heard the nurse returning and quickly retrieved a knife from the dead man's wallet. Hiding behind the door, she waited for the nurse to enter. When he saw the scene, he was shocked, but before he could react, the bride attacked him, slashing his foot and dragging him toward the door. She slammed his head repeatedly until he passed out. Taking his car keys, she pulled herself into a wheelchair and made her way to the hospital garage. Once there, she found the nurse's truck and climbed inside. Although she had survived the first part of her ordeal, she knew she still had much to do. Sitting in the truck, she focused on trying to move her toes, determined to regain control of her body. In a voiceover, the bride reflects on her situation, stating, "When fortune smiles on something as violent and ugly as revenge, it seems proof like no other that not only does God exist, but you're also doing His will." The bride had set her mind on revenge. The deadly Viper assassination squad was made up of 4 members, and she was going to track them down one by one. The story then shifts to show her arriving at a house in Pasadena, California, where toys are scattered in the yard. She walks up to the door and rings the bell. A woman named Vernita Green, one of her targets, answers the door. The bride attacked Vernita Green immediately, and they fought fiercely throughout the house, knocking over furniture and mirrors in their battle. As they grabbed knives and prepared for another round, they heard a school bus pull up outside. Vernita's daughter was arriving home. Seeing her daughter approach, Vernita gave the bride a pleading look. Both women quickly hid their knives before the little girl walked in. The child noticed how messy the room was and gave the bride a curious stare, but Vernita calmly told her to go to her room so she could talk with her friend. Once the girl was out of sight, the 2 women went into the kitchen and poured themselves cups of coffee. While there, Vernita begged the bride not to kill her in front of her daughter, admitting that she knew she deserved death. The bride agreed, and they arranged to meet later that night to settle their fight properly. However, as Vernita reached for a cereal box, she suddenly turned and shot at the bride with a gun hidden inside. The bride was quick to duck, narrowly avoiding the bullet. In an instant, she retaliated, stabbing Vernita with her knife and killing her. As the bride pulled her knife from Vernita's body, Vernita's daughter walked in and saw her mother lying dead. The bride, deeply aware of the child's shock, told her it wasn't her intention to kill her mother that way. She added that if one day the girl wanted to seek revenge for her mother's death, she would be ready. With that, the bride left the house and crossed Vernita Green's name off her list. Her next target was Oren Ishii, whom the bride described as the easiest to find. The story shifts to an anime-style sequence as the bride tells us about Oren Ishii's background. Oren was born to a Japanese father and a Chinese mother on a US military base in Japan. When she was just a child, Oren witnessed the brutal murder of her parents by a ruthless crime boss, Matsumoto. From that day she swore revenge. At the age of 12, she succeeded in killing Matsumoto. By the time Oren turned 20, she had become one of Japan's most feared assassins. 4 years ago, she was part of the deadly Viper assassination squad that carried out the massacre at the church in El Paso. The bride, recounting the events, notes that Oren had killed 9 people that day, but the bride herself had survived, and now she was out for revenge. But before facing Oren, the bride needed to walk again. After managing to wiggle her toe, she spent 13 hours regaining control of her body. Once she could move, she left the truck where she'd been recovering and drove off. To execute her revenge, the bride first needed a weapon. She traveled to Okinawa, Japan, and entered a bar where she spoke in broken Japanese to the owner. She asked to see a man named Hattori Hanzo, who, as it turned out, was the very man standing in front of her. Hanzo was a legendary sword maker, and the bride sought his help to forge the finest sword for her mission. However, Hanzo had retired from making swords years earlier, and had vowed never to craft another one. The bride pleaded with him, but he initially refused. It wasn't until she mentioned that the sword would be used to kill Bill, his former student and the leader of the deadly Viper assassination squad, that Hanzo agreed to help. Bill had gone rogue, and Hanzo wanted to put an end to his evil deeds as well. A month later, Hanzo completed the sword. As he handed it to the bride, he told her that this was his finest creation, blessing her mission to destroy Bill. Before facing Oren Ishii, the bride explains that after the massacre, Oren, with Bill's financial backing, took control of a powerful crime clan in Tokyo. She was supported by her gang, known as the Crazy 88. Among them was Sophie, her closest friend, and Gogo Yubari, her 18-year-old but dangerously insane personal bodyguard. The leader of the Crazy 88 army was Johnny M.O. The bride notes that although Oren Ishii was only half Japanese and half Chinese, she managed to become the head of a Japanese clan. This topic was raised only once at a clan meeting, but Oren quickly silenced any dissent by beheading the man who brought it up. After that, no one dared question her authority again. As the bride traveled to Tokyo to confront Oren, Oren and her gang were on their way to a restaurant, where the staff gave them a grand entrance, fearful of Oren's deadly reputation. The bride soon arrived at the restaurant where Oren Ishii and her gang were gathered. As she listened in on their conversation, Oren became suspicious and threw a hairpin at the door, instructing her bodyguard Gogo to check for any intruders. The bride had quickly hidden herself on the ceiling, avoiding detection. Once Gogo left, the bride climbed down and decided to visit the restroom to come up with a plan. While in the restroom, fate played its part. Sophie, Oren's close associate, entered the restroom too. The bride seized the opportunity and captured Sophie, holding her hostage. She called out for Oren Ishii to come and face her. When Oren saw the bride, she was shocked. Before Oren could react, the bride swiftly cut off Sophie's arm, sending a clear message. The restaurant emptied almost immediately as everyone fled the scene. Oren ordered her men to attack the bride, but they were no match for her. Wielding the sword made by Hattori Hanzo, the bride easily defeated them. Afterward, she challenged Oren, asking if that was all she had to offer. That's when Gogo, Oren's personal bodyguard, stepped forward to fight. The bride tried to reason with her, asking her to reconsider her loyalty to Oren, but Gogo only laughed mockingly. She was ready to fight using her signature weapon, a ball of blades attached to a chain. The fight between the bride and Gogo was intense, with Gogo landing several hits on the bride. Gogo's skills were impressive, and she managed to cut the bride multiple times. However, the bride's experience and determination gave her the upper hand. She eventually stabbed Gogo's foot, and then drove a wooden plank with nails into her face, ending the fight. The bride retrieved her sword and stared at Oren, signaling that she was next. Before the bride could move forward, she heard the sound of motorcycles approaching. It was Johnny M.O. and his army, the Crazy 88. They entered the restaurant and surrounded the bride, preparing to attack. Standing on a glass-covered pool, the bride braced herself as they closed in. In the ensuing battle, the bride fought bravely, taking on waves of attackers from every side. The fight spanned the entire room, with the bride eventually making her way up the stairs. She defeated each opponent with skill and precision. When the lights came on, the last fighter standing was just a young boy. Instead of killing him, the bride cut his sword down to its base, spanked him, and sent him running home. Then, Johnny Mo confronted her. Though he was a skilled fighter, he couldn't match the bride's expertise, and she quickly took him down. Afterward, the bride looked around at the carnage. Bodies lay everywhere, both dead and injured. She allowed the survivors to take the wounded for medical help, but ordered them to leave behind the severed limbs. Sophie, still alive, was ordered to stay put. Next, the bride sought out Oren Ishii, who was waiting outside on a snow-covered ground. Oren complimented the bride's sword and asked where she got it. When the bride told her it was made by Hattori Hanzo in Okinawa, Oren was skeptical until she saw Hanzo's signature on the blade. Oren then asked the bride if she had saved enough strength for their fight, and they both prepared for battle. Oren won the first exchange, slashing the bride across the back and mocking her for being a Caucasian trying to fight like a samurai. But the bride quickly recovered and challenged Oren to attack again. This time the bride got the upper hand, cutting Oren's thigh. Oren, realizing the bride's skill, apologized for underestimating her. In their final exchange, the bride swiftly cut off Oren Ishii's scalp, finally achieving a major part of her revenge. But her mission was far from over. Afterward, the bride took Sophie with her and threw her down a hill near a hospital. Sophie was rescued and later visited by Bill, the leader of the Deadly Viper assassination squad. Before leaving Sophie, the bride told her that she was sparing her for two reasons: to gather information about the Deadly Vipers and to send a message to Bill. On her way to Tokyo, the bride wrote down the names of the remaining targets: Vernita Green, Oren Ishii, Bud, L. Driver, and finally Bill. With Vernita and Oren dead, 3 remained. As the movie ends, Bill asks Sophie a crucial question. He asks if the bride knows that her daughter is alive.